There's this moment I've noticed in conversations with people who are doing pretty well in life. I don't mean they're doing perfect, maybe just steady. Their big pieces are mostly in place. Work's going fine, family's being cared for. If somebody asked how things are going, the honest answer would probably be that things are good. But somewhere inside that life, this question starts to show up. And it usually doesn't come out loud at first. It shows up more like something you notice one day when nothing's really wrong. Life just doesn't feel as exciting as it used to. And not unhappy, just a little quieter. Sometimes that realization shows up in a small moment that you didn't expect. You finish something you worked for a long time. Maybe a project finally wraps up. Something you've been building finally gets to the finish line. You expected that moment to feel bigger. And when it gets here, you mostly just feel calm. You might sit there for a second wondering if something's missing. The accomplishment's real, the outcome's good, but this emotional high you expected never really shows up. It's not disappointment, you just sort of feel neutral. Another version of this shows up when life starts to feel in rhythm. Earlier in life, there are a lot of unknowns. You're figuring out what direction to go, you're trying things that might or might not work. That period carries a certain electricity with it. Every step you take that moves you forward feels new. Eventually, though, many people start to build something more stable. Your work is going to start to be more defined. You start carrying things that matter to other people. And without anyone really announcing it, life just starts to take on more structure. Somewhere along that transition, those emotional highs we talked about begin to settle down. And what used to feel like discovery begins to feel more like maintenance. Like, again, nothing's necessarily wrong, but something just feels different. I've heard people quietly wonder about this stage. They'll say something like, I'm grateful for my life. I really am. And you can tell they mean it, but right after that sentence, there's just this pause. Then they'll add something like, I just don't feel the same excitement I used to feel. It's an honest observation, and it can be confusing because from the outside, their life often looks like it's going well. They're responsible, they've built stability that many people are still trying to reach. But internally, the emotional tone has shifted. Times that they once felt energized now just feel normal. Things that used to create this rush of momentum now feel like part of just the normal rhythm of life. And if someone doesn't have language for that shift, it's really easy to start assuming the problem's got to be personal. Maybe I've lost my drive. Maybe something's wrong with my motivation. Underneath those questions, there's usually this other assumption that's just kind of sitting there in the background. Somewhere along the way, we started believing that if life is moving in the right direction, it should still feel exciting. But when I listen to people describe this experience, I often notice something very, very interesting. Most of the time, they're not describing a life that's falling apart. They're describing a life that's very stable. Responsibilities are being carried. Things that matter to them, they protect, they maintain. And that kind of life tends to look very responsible from the outside. Emotionally, though, it often feels quieter than those earlier seasons of life. Those years when everything was new had a lot of motion inside them. There were risks, there were unknowns, there were times you had no idea how things were going to turn out. Discovery has this natural energy to it. You feel it when you're building something that doesn't exist yet. And you especially feel it when the future is wide open and it feels like every step forward changes the landscape of what's going on. Later on, though, many people step into a different kind of season. Those unknowns start to go away. And certain decisions, you've already made them. And life becomes less about exploring possibilities and more about stewarding what's already been built. And stewardship has a very different emotional texture than discovery. It's steadier, more grounded. Sometimes it even feels quiet. And that quietness can be confusing if someone unconsciously expects life to always feel the way it did during those earlier years. When excitement fades, the mind starts searching for explanations. Something must be off. Something must have changed inside me. Sometimes the only thing that actually changed is that life no longer feels as exciting as we quietly expected it would. But sometimes what has changed is simply just the stage of life itself. Discovery seasons are loud. Stewardship seasons often move at a slower emotional volume. And a person can enter that stage without anyone ever explaining that the shift might feel different from the inside. So people start interpreting the quietness as loss. They look back at earlier years, they remember how energizing everything felt. They remember that momentum and the sense that every step forward carried some jolt of possibility. Then they look at their present life and they notice how normal many things feel. Hey, I'm handling responsibilities, I'm showing up where I'm needed, I'm continuing to move life forward. But the emotional spikes that came with progress just aren't as strong anymore. And without realizing it, they start to wonder if they've somehow misplaced a part of themselves that used to feel exciting. What's interesting is that many of these people are actually living lives that are deeply meaningful. They're showing up for people who depend on them. They're protecting the things they care about. They're building stability that didn't exist before. Those things oftentimes grow very slowly and very quietly. The outside structure of life becomes stronger. The inside emotional life becomes steadier, and steadiness can feel very different from excitement. Sometimes when people finally recognize this shift, there's this moment of relief. And not because a problem has been solved, but because they realize they might not be broken after all. They may simply be standing in a different season of life than the one they remember. And it's just a season where the loud energy of discovery has slowly given way to something calmer, something that's more grounded, something that doesn't always announce itself with excitement. And once that possibility enters the conversation, the whole experience begins to look a little different. Instead of asking why excitement disappeared, a person might notice that life itself has changed shape. The structure is stronger. The meaning is often deeper than it used to be. It just carries a different emotional tone than the earlier chapters did. Sometimes a shift from discovery into stewardship just sounds quieter from the inside. And recognizing that possibility can feel strangely comforting, even if the question itself is still sitting there, because it leaves open the chance that nothing important has actually been lost.